Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another Goosebumps talk type of video. As per usual, it's centered around the new Goosebumps show. As of now, we don't know if it's going to be released in 2021. Have my fingers crossed and high hopes for 2022, maybe even 2023. If we can get it this fall in 2021, that would be absolutely amazing. But if you clicked on this video, obviously, we are here to talk about the things the new show must do. Now, I could have easily just wrote down 5 things, but I jotted down a number of things I have seen on the internet, whether it be videos, forums, comment sections, what have you. I've written down some ideas that I personally agree with. Now, some of these ideas and things I'm about to say might be considered debatable, and some people will disagree. There's probably a given on that. So if you disagree, I respect your opinion too. And if you want to leave a comment in the comment section, I am totally down and open to talk about all of this because I'm a fan. And regardless, I think I'll enjoy the show. But I think there's one given rule before we get into all the things the show must do. This is the one cardinal rule that we can all agree with. It needs to be an anthology show. It should not be a show that's centered around the movie universe that Sony has created. And here's why. I think those movies got mixed reviews. A lot of people compare it to Jumanji and other blockbuster films like that. And it wasn't centered around the stories that make Goosebumps Goosebumps. And if the show isn't an anthology show, that's going to turn a lot of people off the bat. So that's the cardinal rule. We don't even have to say this is a must. This is a you better do it or else. It needs to be an anthology show. Okay. And one thing that I want to mention before we get into these points I've written down is something that I would personally like to see. And I want to get this one out of the way because I don't think this is a must. This is something I would really love to see done in the show. I would love to see time periods utilized in the show. And now hear me out on this. What I mean by that is the Classic 62 and Tales to Give You Goosebumps books primarily, and a good healthy amount of the Give Yourself Goosebumps books. I feel that telling a time period would give a sense of continuity within the show. Whether you want to start in the 90s and work your way to present day in the seasons, or you want to have equal representation of different time periods in each season as you go along, I just think that this will add a different flair to the show. Our, counter arguments would be this will raise the budget. They would have to do sets centered around making up the sets to look like the 90s and whatnot. But I think that extra effort would really hit home with the viewers, especially the original Goosebumps fans that came from the 90s and, even the late 2000s. Having time periods utilized could really help to have identity with the stories that they are adapting and what that time period was like. That would be an atmospheric thing to build on, and it can establish some continuity. And I think this is a really good point to bring up personally for me. I don't think this is a must, but I would love to see time periods utilized. So I have like stories in the 90s, stories in the late 90s to early 2000s, stories in the late 2000s, pushing 2010, stories 2015 to present day, have all walks of time periods in the show since Goosebumps as a franchise has been alive. All right, so here's the first point. Now we're getting into the points that I think that are musts for this show, and I've collected some of these myself. These are a mixture of things I want to see and things that I have agreed with that I've seen online. And like I said earlier in the video, if you think a topic is debatable, I completely respect your opinion and I would love to hear your thoughts on it, okay? So the first point I want to bring up is allow whatever time is needed for each story. Now this is very open-ended. This could be a dual interpretation. Should there be set time frames for each episode? Well, that's all into the politics of what network is picking up the show, or if it's on streaming, or what have you. If there is a time crunch, then there's going to be some roadblocks with some stories. And I think that when we're dealing with chapter books that are a little bit longer than novellas, inherently, condensing 130-ish pages on average down to 20 minutes was a problem the old show had. And I think a lot of us have grown accepted the streaming format. Like a prime example would be The Mandalorian, where you can have a 28-minute episode and then the next episode could be 44 minutes. It's all contingent on how long the story needs to play out. Like, for example, The Haunted Mask in the original show is 42 minutes because you add two episodes together that makes a two-parter. It's 21 minutes apiece. That's including the intro and credits on each episode. If you cut an intro and credit out of one episode and just had one intro and one credit in one concentric episode, that will shave off a minute and a half from 42 minutes. So that'll probably put it down to 40 minutes and 40 and a half minutes that you would need. Which is right in the guesstimation range of the average story would probably need anywhere from 24 minutes to 42 minutes to tell. I don't see them going past that point unless they are adapting like a bigger book or books with like over 160 pages. Then I can see that happening. But there's very few of those. But that's just some room for thought. You know, look at episodes like Attack of the Mutant that had a two-parter in the original show. If you take those 42 minutes, you take out one intro and one credit scene, you're left with 40 and a half minutes. Now look at that episode as one episode. How many minutes go by in that episode that could be cut out? The reason why they had to make two-parters was because they couldn't just make a 26-minute episode back then. They had to make that 21-minute crunch. Now, if they were allowed to add 5 minutes to it, we probably would have never gotten that extra episode of unneeded walking around for 10, 12 minutes. Just food for thought, you know? Something to think about. The next point is it needs to have a higher rating than TVY7. And here's why. TVY7, I'm pretty sure that was the original rating for the show on Fox Kids. This rating allows kids to willy-nilly be able to freely watch the show. But there's give and take with that. You can have general audience watching the show, but there's limitations of what you can show in the show. As far as, like, let's say there's a person transforming into something, you can't really show that because that's too graphic. You can't show a monster biting into somebody if it's depicted in the book because it's TVY7. So my recommendation would be TVY7 FV, which is TVY7 Fantasy Violence, TVG or TVPG. Where I would want to see it is TVPG because then they can show, like for example, Werewolf of Fever Swamp. You can show the werewolf transformation. You can show that. You can show the werewolf biting into Grady. You can show that because it's PG. And there's a little more leeway of what you're allowed to get away with. I'm not saying TV-14 that's completely unnecessary, but I think TVPG, maybe TVG, at the very lowest, TVY7 FV. But I just don't see the necessity to do TVY7. I just think that that'll be kind of a waste, if you ask me. All right, next point. This one could be debatable. I know this was kind of a controversial one, but keep social politics out of the show. The books, every Goosebumps book I've ever read, there's no social politics in Goosebumps. And I know today we're in a modern society where writers are writing individuality and identity into a character and making that the forefront of the character. That is completely unnecessary in a product that has historically never has done that. And I just think that it will take away from the show, and it will hurt everybody's love for the show. Um, I don't mind diversity in the show. Characters are up into interpretation with casting and whatnot. But writing a script and completely changing the character's dialogue or role in the show to fit a narrative, I think would hurt the show in the long run. So that's why I think you just need to stay away from social politics in the show, period. Identity politics, the list goes on. Have diversity, but just don't make that the focal point. Trust me. This is the problem IDW Comics is having right now, and why it has such horrible fan reception is because of the identity and social politics in the comics. Just leave it alone. Don't even try to touch it. Just don't. I don't see this ending well, personally. And I'm pretty sure there's people out there that will agree with me on that. Next point. Now, this is another debatable topic. I get it. There's a generation of people that have grown up with hardcore CGI. But I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, and practical effects allow so much different, it just allows a lot more depth to a story than CGI can. So this point I'm bringing up is, don't use CGI over practical effects unless it's absolutely necessary. I know we're not going to get a practical effect, giant praying mantis from Shocker on Shock Street. That's a given. But with episodes like The Haunted Mask, you don't need a CGI mask. Werewolf of Fever Swamp, they pulled off a werewolf in a low-budget show, and that thing actually looked creepy because it looked real. You don't need a CGI werewolf. You really don't. But it is the same producers are producing this show, and this is a kind of this is a legit worry I have with this choice to go with these producers, is that they're probably going to want to use those CGI effects, and I think that will take away from a lot of the older fans, because Stein and the people that have announced the show said it's going to be for all ages. Even adults will enjoy this show. So whatever that entails, I just don't see the need to do CGI, because everyone knows the practical effects offer a little bit more when it comes to body horror and true horror. Like, if it looks real, then it means more as a viewer. If it's just CGI, it can get kind of corny, it can get kind of repetitive. It can almost take away from the whole story sometimes. That's my recommendation. Now, some people might debate that. That's fine, but that's just how I think about it. All right. Next point. And I can't stress this enough. I can't stress this point enough. Make sure to have a catchy music score with the opening theme and the in credits. Jack, what is his name? I think his name is Jack Letts or Lentz or something like that. He wrote the original music score for the Fox Kids Goosebumps show, and he's still alive today. If he's still able to produce music, how great would it be to have him come back and write a new Goosebumps opening theme? Now, it's up in contention who owns the rights to the song. He might own partial rights. I haven't really done that much research into it, to be honest. My guess would be Fox owns the rights to the song, which means Disney owns the rights to the song. But it's almost a given they're going to have to make a new opening theme and music score for the show. It needs to be good. It needs to be good. You have no idea how iconic that original show's music score is. And if you mess this up, if it has a bad intro, that can honestly kind of defeat a lot of people's opinions about the show off the bat. Starting with episode 1, you've really got to make sure it's there. Test audience this show, test the music, and rule out the ones that don't work. Really put some effort into that. I think that's a given. Everybody wants that. So yeah. Next point. Now, this one I think is universally agreed with. There's some people that are adamant they should not remake any episodes from the classic series, period. And I respect people who have that opinion, but I highly doubt that to be the case. This is a brand new show at Sony. They're not honoring the Fox Kids legacy. Although they should in some ways, which is why I bring up this point. They need to pay respect to the classic series episodes that fans love. Keyword love. When remaking them. Whether that be, if you love the original show and you know a remake of Haunted Mask is coming, why not invite Catherine Long, the actress who played Carly Beth, to be the mom in the new show, or at least have a cameo in the new episode? Something like that. Pay respect to the effects. Don't second guess the old show, because the old show does have a diehard fan base. And if you remake a classic episode that everyone loves and you do it badly, I promise you, people will be upset. So if you're going to remake it, look to those old episodes and try to do it justice. That's the best way I can put it. I know people have their own, artists have different interpretations of things. They have different inspirations. And they might go a completely different route, maybe on the aesthetics, on the look of the mask, or look of a werewolf, look of a vampire, whatever. But if the episode is genuinely loved by fans, pay respect to it, okay? If it came from the Fox Kids show. Just take that in mind and into consideration. All right, next point. This is a huge for me, and I'm going to drive this home. This might be probably the most important one to me, even though it's not my, I wouldn't say my number one thing I want to see done. But this is probably the biggest must for me. You need to focus on horror more than comedy in this show. This is Goosebumps' last shot at a TV show anthology series, right? If you focus on stories like They Call Me the Night Howler over stories like Ghost Camp, you're really going to upset people. People read the books. Fans read the books. I get the whole concept of inviting casuals that may have never read Goosebumps before, have never even have been interested in reading it before. You need to capture casuals. I don't think that going the comedy route is the right direction for a kids' horror series that has been struggling ever since it died in the late 90s, mind you. Okay? So you need to focus on Goosebumps' strengths, which is it's horror. It's kids' horror. Focus on that. Focus on making episodes that are worth telling. That's so important. I get Beware the Purple Peanut Butter might be a fun story, but is it going to be scary for the casuals and fans? I mean, I know fans want to see it, but is it going to be worth telling? Is it going to be focused on horror or comedy? Start thinking about those things. I get it. We probably won't get every book. I'm going to say that right now. We're probably not going to get every book. We're probably not going to get every story. But what matters is they pick the stories worth making that capture the horror first. If they can get to a point where they can get to the funny stories or the funnier stories, if the show is doing well, incorporate some more funny ones, mix them in. But especially with the first season, I even say the second season as well, focus on the horror more than anything. All right, now this point kind of goes hand in hand with that. Next point is don't overload the first season with the best stories of all time, so each season is balanced as the show goes along. What I mean by that is don't put Night of the Living Dummy 1, 2, 3, One Day at Horrorland, Monster Blood, all the best stories people can think of, don't put them all in one season. That's putting all of your eggs in one basket. What else would people have to wait for? Like, if you're going to have some big heavy hitters every season, you need to space them out, because it continues to drive interest in the show, and people will continue watching in hopes that that episode will be made. If you put them all in one season, people are like, okay, they made him. Everything else I don't really care about. And that can also, hurt the further seasons, because if you put all the A tier stories in the season 1, and then all you're left with is B, C, D, and E tier, there's no more mass attention. So you need to spread them out. Okay? That's a must. You're thinking about finishing a marathon, not a sprint. Think about it like that. Okay. Next point, this is also another really important one. Focus on quality over quantity. The old show, concentrically, on average, probably had 22 to 24 episodes a season. Counting that most seasons had, minus season 4, had about 4 to 5 two-parters. The actual stories they got to tell were usually around 18 to 20. And that's adding the two-parters together into one concentric story. So the quantity is there, but the quality was kind of miss. Also, it was a low-budget show set in a 21-minute time crunch. With this new show, I would honestly recommend maybe 14 to 16 episode seasons. If you want to lay them out, let's say you film all these episodes, and you get to a point where you're like, okay, we're done filming, let's get the seasons put together. You go to the editing room, and you notice that one story and another story, if you put them together into one episode, it makes a clear as day 42 to 45 minute episode. Why don't you do 2 stories an episode? You don't need to constantly worry about pumping out smaller, low budget episodes that are condensing the material too far. Okay? Quality over quantity. This also goes hand in hand with making stories that are worth telling. Focus on the stories that you know will get fans excited, get viewers excited. Maybe even convert casuals to actual fans of Goosebumps, like the old show did with us. That old show was able to capture something there, even though we know now that it was missing a lot of things. It was missing on the quality. And there was gems in the rough in that old show. But there's huge opportunity to hit a home run with every single episode if you focus on the quality. That's the main thing. Don't worry about pumping out all these different stories a season just to make them, to appease people. Focus on the quality. People will respond to that way more than the quantity. I promise you that. All right. So another point, this is getting to the next to last. This is the next to last point. Things they must do. Maintain continuity with actors with ongoing sequel series stories. So, for example, Carly Beth in Haunted Mask 1, the episode, needs to be the same Carly Beth in Haunted Mask 2 and Screams of the Haunted Mask. Okay? The boy from Say Cheese and Die needs to be the same boy in Say Cheese and Die and Say Cheese and Die Again. Onward, whatever, if he's in the books. Have the same actor. Part of the problem is with the old show is that you can see Ryan Gosling in one episode of Say Cheese and Die, then the next episode you have a relative unknown, and people are confused. It's almost like clickbait. I think when you hire these actors, hire them into a clause that says, we'll pay you for this, and we'll have you guaranteed work on this story when we get to it, and this story when we get to that. And they sign the contract, then they have to do it. Now I get people sometimes die. People sometimes something happens, like they're working on a bigger project where they're getting more money, they have to pull out of their contract. That happens. But try to nail actors that aren't doing those, trying to get those bigger roles. I understand if people pass away or something tragic happens, I get replacing them at that point. But try to have consistency in the actors. It tells a more concise story, especially when the show's all said and done and people are going back to rewatch it. It will be beautiful. All right. And then this last point, this might be the most debatable one. This might be the most debatable point in this whole thing that the show must do. and this is really contingent about how you view, I guess, personal preference of what you want to see done in the show. But my number one thing I think the show must do is they need to show equal representation of different Goosebumps series in each season. Now, this is open to interpretation, right? You know, let's say they do 14 to 16 episodes and they decide to do 8 original 62 a season, right? Mix the rest of the 8 episodes, mix some Give Yourself, mix some Series 2000, Hall of Horrors, Slappy World. Mix them. Just mix them around. Tales. Mix some Tales short stories in there. You know, if you can do 2 Tales stories in one episode, by all means do it. Then I also get, on the other hand, people want to see an entire season or spin-off show done just for the Horrorland series. And, you know, this could work. You know, Horrorland would be the one thing, that Horrorland 19-book series. Maybe if you want to incorporate One Day at Horrorland from the original 62 and Return to Horrorland from Series 2000 in it as well, you can do a spin-off 2-season arc just for Horrorland. And I think people would really respond to that too. Be smart about it. Don't introduce a Horrorland, One Day at Horrorland in Season 1 and then do Return to Horrorland in Season 2 and then wait all the way until Season 6 to do the Horrorland saga or the Horrorland arc. You know, it'll be kind of a waste. You can just do a Horrorland season or something like that. Get it all done, knocked out and done with. That probably would be feasible, and I think fans wouldn't mind it as much. But at least for the most part, minus the Horrorland season, have equal representation in each season. Now, I get the whole opposite side of the coin. Like I brought up earlier with my personal preference of seeing time periods introduced into the show and utilizing the show. I do think it would also be a fun concept to tell the 90s stories first, like get through the original 62 in Tales, and then get to the other books in question that come after, you know, the early and mid 90s on the timeline. But given that the show is for everyone, given that the show is going to have younger viewers, older viewers that grew up in the 90s, you know, having equal representation of time periods in Goosebumps probably would be more healthy for the show. And there's some really good content out there to mix in each season. I mean, there's like right under 60 books that came out post 2008, and a good amount of those probably, like with Horrorland, would be designated to one season. So I don't see the problem in it. I just think people have been antsy for certain original 62 books for so long that they feel protective over, especially season 1. If they want to do all classic 62 books in season 1, I guess that's fine. You know, if they want to just do stories from that, and then in season 2 onward they can incorporate different stuff, that's fine, I guess. But I'm looking at the representation for all viewers and stuff. Have some older and newer stuff mixed in there, because there's so many good stuff to tell that are worth telling over even a good amount. I want to say a good amount, but a healthy amount of the original 62 probably would be stuff I would consider you should probably get to in the middle of the show's life or later in the show's life, because these other episodes are more important to tell first. That's just my opinion. But anywho, yeah, just my last must would be equal representation of all Goosebumps series in each season. Whatever number that entails, I don't care. Just have representation of, you know, something from different series. It doesn't have to be, you know, something from every single season, series in each season. Just show some representation from different series. Whether you want to take 4 Series 2000 in one season and put 4 of them, and then the rest just whatever, do whatever. Just show that you're willing to do other stories. All right, so yeah, this has been the things the new Goosebumps TV show must do. Let me know in the comment section what points you agree with, what points you disagree with. What are your things that the new Goosebumps TV show must do? I'm curious to hear. Let me know and we can talk about it. And I'll see you next time.